Into TMH Daily English News with me, your host, Deleithna Dewalko. As we move on to the headlines for today, US, EU, and UK has expressed their support for the declaration of indefinite humanitarian truce from the Ethiopian government. The Ethiopian humanitarian truce in Tigray has gotten a lot of cautious reception, and OSHA says food distribution in Tigray has reached an all-time low since March 2021. As we move on to the main stories, Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the United States strongly supports the declaration of an indefinite humanitarian truce. Blinken, in a statement, said this commitment to a cessation of hostilities should be a critical step towards the resumption and sustainment of humanitarian assistance to the people in Tigray and all of the Ethiopian regions and communities that are currently in need. He expressed his government's expectation that this declaration be quickly followed by the movement of life-saving assistance. Blinken added that the humanitarian truce should also serve an essential foundation of an inclusive political process to achieve progress towards common security and prosperity for all of the people of Ethiopia. He also reiterated to his government's call for an immediate end to the violence committed against civilians by all the parties to the conflict and underscored any lasting solutions to the conflict must involve accountability for those responsible for all of the atrocities that have been committed. The United States urged all the parties to build on this announcement to advance a negotiated and sustainable ceasefire, including necessary security arrangements as well. The EU also welcomed the declaration of the humanitarian truce by the government of Ethiopia and the statement on the cessation of hostilities by the Tigrayan authorities. After the Ethiopian forces were pushed out of Tigray in June of last year, Ethiopia's government cut off almost all access to food aid, medical supplies, cash, and fuel in the entire region of Tigray. The World Food Program has warned earlier this year that 3/4 of Tigray's population, which is also 6 million people, are using extreme coping strategies to just simply survive. More than 1/3 are currently suffering in an extreme lack of food. Stefan Dujarric, spokesman for United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, said the UN chief hopes that this truce will translate into an effective cessation of hostilities respected by all parties in the conflict to allow for an effective humanitarian access for all of whom may need it. The support of the Ethiopian government's initiation of truce is in fact global. The UK also welcomed Tigrayan authorities' statement on the cessation of hostilities and encouraged both sides to take concrete steps to ensure that these positive breakthroughs are in fact implemented. In a press statement, the chairperson of AU Commission, also known as AUC, Musa Faki Mahamat, said he welcomed the declaration of indefinite humanitarian truce by the Ethiopian government, and the AUC chairperson also said he welcomed the announcement by the regional government of Tigray to observe the humanitarian ceasefire. Ethiopia's humanitarian truce in Tigray gets cautious reception. Members of the aid community caution that the government's statement haven't always resulted in tangible changes on the ground and emphasize the truce should be in fact extended to all forces involved within the conflict. Devix reported the government of Ethiopia declared an indefinite humanitarian truce in the war-torn Tigray region on Thursday, which is said is to ensure the free flow of emergency humanitarian aid to all of those in need of its assistance. Allowing unimpeded humanitarian access has been an urgent demand of the aid community over the 16-month-long conflict, as communities were deprived of access to food, healthcare, fuel, communications, and even banking services. In the statement, the government called on the donor community to increase assistance and on Tigrayan forces to withdraw from any neighboring regions. Though the members of aid communities are optimistic the truce could result in the humanitarian access, they also caution that the government's statements haven't always resulted in tangible changes on the ground, saying this truce should be extended to all forces involved in the conflict, as the government has enforced a de facto blockade on the Tigray region that has largely halted the delivery of any aid, with only limited shipments allowed, while neighboring regions, Afar and Amhara, have also been pummeled amid the ongoing conflict, as the government's blockade was restricted to Tigray. An estimated 9.4 million people are in need of humanitarian assistance in northern Ethiopia, according to the most recent situation report from the United Nations Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. Families in Tigray are exhausting all remaining means to access food. 3/4 of the population reported to be using extreme coping mechanisms to just simply survive. As of mid-March, there were only about 800 metric tons of food supplies in the region. Nearly 500,000 children are currently in Tigray, estimated to be malnourished. In its statement Thursday, the Ethiopian government said the truce only has desired outcome if it is reciprocated by the other side. An aid worker who spoke to DevX on the condition of anonymity, fearing the retribution from the government, said that while there is hope that the government will follow through on this truce declaration, experience throughout the course of this conflict has shown otherwise, and that the government's statements haven't always resulted in real change. The test here is whether or not this is a genuine truce is on the ground, added the aid worker, again in anonymity. The government's messaging has recently shifted to saying that the reason humanitarians aren't gaining access is in fact because of Tigrayan forces and have pushed into neighboring regions, and that the conflict is what is cutting off all access, as the aid worker said. What we don't want them to do now is say, we've given you a truce and now it's all up to the Tigrayans and their forces. That's sort of a disingenuous statement, because realistically, there's not only one road into Tigray, there are many roads, most of which are in fact controlled entirely by the forces allied to the government. So if the government really wanted to open the route, they could make it happen, but they have not. Another factor in the success of this truce includes the parties involved, the aid worker said, adding that previous ceasefire didn't seem to apply to the government's allies, in fact, which continued fighting amongst all. Lauren Blanchard, a specialist in African affairs with the U.S. Congressional Research Service, echoed this, tweeting, Ethiopia's federal government says it's declaring a humanitarian truce and calls on Tigray forces to reciprocate. These are not, however, the only forces involved in the hostilities. There are regional forces and militias in Amhara and Afar who are in fact willing to participate in a truce and allow aid to flow, she asked. Will it result in a meaningful change on the ground? The anonymous aid worker said, will it result in any access at all? Will we see convoys, which include fuel, reaching people in Tigray? What about the long-standing issues like the telecoms being completely cut off, the banking services cut off, and the blockade of all commercial traffic into the Tigray region? These, of course, are also extremely critical. Lauren added another reaction from Rashid Abdi, analyst on the Horn of Africa. He said Abiy's latest move agreeing to the truce allow aid is believed to be linked to the moves by the U.S. legislature to declare the genocide. In November 2021, U.S. State Department drew up draft declaring Ethiopia's committed genocide in Tigray. Biden administration had withheld signing in a bid to nudge peace within Ethiopia. While this truth is a sign that the right direction and the implementation couldn't be more dire. Food distribution in Tigray has reached an all-time low since March 2021, and OSHA's humanitarian update indicates that food stocks are almost depleted, with only about 68,000 people assisted between the 10th and the 16th of March. According to OSHA, 221.8 metric tons of medical supplies have been airlifted to Tigray so far, which only represents 4% of the total medications required to meet the health needs of Tigray's population. OSHA disclosed that no amount of operational cash has been cleared to be transferred into Tigray since the 10th of March 2022. Thousands of Tigrayans currently are facing mass detentions in various areas of Tigray as they are held in extremely dire bad conditions. Over 1,250 Tigrayans detained in Wachamo University told TMH that they are exposed to life-threatening situations due to lack of food and medicines, adding that 2 have so far already died. They added 3 of the women, over 100 of them, have been forced to give birth while detained in these detention centers. The sources said guards of the detention centers are inflicting torture on the detainees, and that many Tigrayans who were taken out of the premises are currently still unaccounted for. As we move on to our final news for today, the OLA says the state terrorism on the Oromo people has continued unabated. In a press release, the Oromo Liberation Front and its military wing, OLA, indicated that the state-sponsored ethnic cleansing by Abiy Ahmed and extremist Amhara forces on the Oromo people has continued and now is in full swing. The press release stated that Benshangul Gumuz region is particularly becoming a staging ground for state terrorists, forces compromising the Ethiopian National Defense Forces, the Amhara Special Forces, and the organized Amhara bandits called Fano. The press release disclosed that last Tuesday, the Amhara forces extrajudicial executed Amsalu Amante, an Oromo Ero, and looted property in Debete Werada of Benshangul Gumuz. It added that they also burned down about 50 houses to the ground in another clear attempt to ethnically cleanse Oromos from Benshangul Gumuz. Only a few bodies have been identified so far. From these ashes, as the OLF said in the statement, it indicated that the genocidal forces operating in coordination with the state officials by organizing themselves and attacking groups of around 200 to 400 soldiers. The press release recalled on the 15th of March 2022, Berhana Ragsa, a pregnant Oromo woman and mother of 7, was brutally beheaded in another round of Stone Age savagery, which is becoming a signature act of atrocities being committed by all of Amhara forces. Only 2 days later, the Amhara forces operating in the Benshangul Gumuz region had also debussed and abducted 18 Oromo students in the Debate area, Werada of Benshangul, at a place known to locals as Bishan Addi. The fate of these 12 students and 6 others unidentified persons currently still remains unknown. It is also to be recalled that Abiy Ahmed's security forces and the associated Amhara vigilante group had killed scores of natives in Benshangul, burned ethnic Tigrayans alive in Benshangul Gumuz region just a couple weeks ago. OLA called on the international community to discharge its responsibilities to protect civilians from mass atrocity crimes. It urged the international community to do its part to constrain the regime's capacity to unleash terror on the innocent civilians. It also called on the regime's international partners and the wider international community to impose sanctions that can effectively limit its military and financial capabilities. They asked that the regime's partners ought to suspend the sale or transfer of any weaponry to Abiy Ahmed and his associates, including, most especially, the Eritrean regime. That concludes our news for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. See you next week. Bye-bye.